continue our worship by greeting one another with signs of love and peace. some children willing to come forward this morning? Remember, you don't have to. You can stay there where it's safe. But never contradict your parents. Never. Okay, have a seat here. Yeah, come on over this way. There you go. Okay, everyone got the memo about wearing something green this morning. I like it. It's Pentecost, so we're still in the green season. We'll be wearing green here in church for quite a while. Have you guys ever been frightened? Never. Oh, come on. Give me one case of when you've been frightened. What's the most frightening thing that's ever happened to you? What? You're scared of monsters. Well, have you ever seen one? No. In the movie? Have you seen a monster in a movie? Did you ever go to scary movies? No, I haven't been to one yet. Don't. I remember seeing King Kong. Have you ever seen King Kong? Oh, King Kong scared the daylights out of me. King Kong was a big gorilla. I mean, really big. Well, all right. I'm sure you've been frightened at some point. Yeah. Are you gazing in profound rapture at the bottom of the pew? All right. All right, there you go. You've been frightened, I'm sure. You don't have to tell us all about it, but occasionally we get frightened. And that can be a good time to think about what you're here on earth for, so that you can make sure you do something good in response to life, which sometimes is scary. And you've got a long life ahead of you and plenty of time to do some good, to comfort people who are frightened, to comfort people who are hurting. So let that just be a resolution to you when you are frightened to get the help you need, to stop being frightened, and then to help others. In our adult sermon, we'll hear more about frightening things, but you'll be elsewhere. We'll save that for you for when you get older. Okay, thanks for coming up.
Morning. Pardon me. Our first reading is Habakkuk from the Old Testament, chapter 2, 1 through 4. And our gospel reading is Romans chapter 1, 18 through 23. I will take my stand to watch and station myself on the tower, and look forth to see what he will say to me. And I will answer concerning my complaint. And the Lord answered me, write the vision, make it plain upon tablets, so he may run who reads it. For still the vision awaits its time. It hastens to the end. It will not lie. If it seem slow, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. Behold, he whose soul is not upright in him shall fail, but the righteous shall live by his faith. Romans 1, 18 through 23. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and wickedness of men, who by their wickedness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. Ever since the creation of the world, his invisible nature, namely his eternal power and deity, has been clearly perceived in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God, or give thanks to him. But they became futile in their thinking, and their senseless minds were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man, or birds, or animals, or reptiles. Blessed be the word of the Lord.
Well, good morning. It's come to my attention that some people, or one person at least, has requested titles for my sermons, which is fine, except I'm terrible at coming up with titles, often because I haven't written anything until, well, like last night. So it's hard for me to predict what's going to come of my sermon preparation. Well, here's a title. I'll be talking about, just to give you a hint of what's coming, I'll be talking about Paul and Luther and God. I don't think I mentioned Jesus. Well, all right. I hope you'll forgive that one. I don't mention Jesus or Christ. I do talk about God quite a lot. And since I'm talking about Luther, let me advertise our Bible study, which will meet. It'll meet this Thursday. I won't be here. But the following Thursday, the 15th of September, for Bible study, we'll be looking at a very good movie about Luther, a feature film. And we'll be looking at that on Thursday the 15th and Thursday the 22nd, because it's a 2-hour film. We'll do half one Thursday and half the next. It's excellent, so I recommend coming on by the parish hall to take a look at this. All people are welcome to this Bible study. Correct? Yes? For the moment, it's a women's Bible study plus the pastor. Men folk are very welcome. We enjoy balancing out that perspective greatly. Okay, so fasten your seatbelts. Here comes Paul and Luther again. We'll be on Luther and Paul and God for the remainder of the fall, actually. I'll be referring back to these guys. They're very important. And then along about Advent, we'll shift into the Isaiah prophecies to get ready for Christmas. This week in history, 77 years ago plus 3 days, on September 1st, 1939, World War II began. It was the most destructive war in history up to that point, and it has not been equaled since. That day has been immortalized in many ways, also in verse by one of my favorite poets, W.H. Auden. He was an Englishman who was living in New York City on September 1st, 1939, and he wrote a poem entitled September 1st, 1939. He wrote, here's the first 2 stanzas. I sit in one of the dives on 52nd Street, uncertain and afraid, as the clever hopes expire of a low, dishonest decade. Waves of anger and fear circulate over the bright and darkened lands of the earth, obsessing our private lives. The unmentionable odor of death offends the September night. Accurate scholarship can unearth the whole offense from Luther until now that has driven a culture mad. Find what occurred at Linz, what huge imago made a psychopathic God. I and the public know what all school children learn, that those to whom evil is done do evil in return. What happened in Linz? Well, it's a lovely town in Austria on the Danube. It's also where Adolf Hitler was born, the psychopathic God to whom he refers. Hitler, like all demagogues, was an expert
at magnifying and mobilizing resentment, so that people who believe that they have been picked on attempt to rectify things and go overboard and make things worse. Hence the lines, "I and the public know, but all skilled children learn, that those to whom evil is done do evil in return." You might say that's the story of history over and over again. Thus the poet pondered what led to the outbreak of war 77 years and 3 days ago today. And today in America we stagger into the last 2 months of a presidential election campaign that has already lasted, well, it's almost been 2 years, and it seems like forever. And despite the vitriol of this campaign, we do well to remind ourselves that things could be worse, and they have been worse, and that our time today, September 4th, 2016, all things considered, at least today is not nearly so full of bad portent as September 4th, 1939. So let us be grateful. Last week in the Bible, I juxtaposed the bad news and the good news. This is what the Bible does. I left the bad news to the Old Testament prophet Jeremiah and the good news to Paul the Apostle. This week, I've reversed the order. This week, the Old Testament prophet Habakkuk gives us the good news, the assurance of faith, and Paul gives us the bad news, the wrath of God. First, Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4. "Behold, he whose soul is not upright in him shall fail, but the righteous shall live by his faith." This line, repeated by Paul, as we heard last week, inspired a young monk in Germany named Martin Luther to understand that the love of God was not something one earned or attained or grasped, but rather the love of God was freely given by God. But that was last week. Now it's this week, and we have verse 18 from Paul. It's actually rather amazing that Romans chapter 1, verses 17 and 18 sit there right next to each other in the same letter, written by the same author, but there they are. Chapter 17, "For in it the righteousness of God, for in it the gospel, for in the gospel the righteousness of God is revealed through faith for faith. As it is written, he who through faith is righteous shall live." Or some translators write, "the righteous shall live by faith." They're both good translations. The righteous shall live by faith. He who through faith is righteous shall live. It's all true. It's all very good. Chapter 18 follows, however, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and wickedness of men, who by their wickedness suppress the truth." So, on the one hand, Paul gives us the assurance of God's love. On the other, he warns us of God's wrath. What are we to do? Well, I might add that these lines are important to me because I've heard them under rather extraordinary circumstances. I first studied them in seminary with a great teacher, which of course was a thrill and a great privilege. That was back in 1977, in the spring in New York City. Then when I was studying for my PhD 12 years later in Berkeley, I heard these verses again in a worship service. I had gotten in the habit of worshiping at a number of different houses of worship in Berkeley, including the Pacific School of Religion, which is you might say, the generic mainline Protestant seminary there. So I was affiliated with that seminary. And I also worshiped at the Jesuit School of Theology. The collegiality of Catholics and Protestants in the United States is certainly one of the triumphs of our polity, and it's a great privilege now to live way after the Wars of Reformation, when Catholic and Protestant and Jewish and now Islamic and Buddhist clergy all generally get along pretty well. We cooperate, we meet for coffee, we chat, and life is really pretty darn good. We have much for which to be thankful. But anyway, it was then, at the Jesuit School of Theology, that I encountered the full force of Romans chapter 1, verses 17 and 18. I was at the daily Mass offered at the Jesuit School at 5 p.m. on October 7th, 1989. The service began on time. The Jesuits are nothing if not punctual. And Father Greener, I'll never forget, stepped to the podium just a few minutes after 5 to read the very passage we are studying this morning. He got through a few verses, which we read last week, and then began Romans chapter 1, verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and wickedness of men, he read, and then he paused. He had to, for he had heard, as well as everyone else, the sound slowly building up from deep, deep under our feet. It had started out rather faintly, this sound, as he began the sentence, so he kept on reading. But halfway through, it was a full-throttle roar like a locomotive, and the building was shaking. Then the walls and windows literally began to dance, as if a giant had picked the whole building up and was shaking it in a vaguely circular motion, like this. So, imitate this motion, would you? Just do a little circle. Okay, so imagine the whole building doing a little circular dance with the windows liquid somehow. How a building can shake like that with a circular motion going through it, and then it stopped. So 10 seconds of boom. So that was caused by a thrust slip fault. For those of you who are not familiar with earthquakes, you can have a number of varieties of earthquakes. The simplest one is a continental shelf slams into the other like this, and then you get shock waves like this, as if someone comes into you. Okay? You can get a fault that comes up and tosses you into the air. Did you know this? You can have an earthquake that just comes up and tosses you upwards. We had one of those in Los Angeles about 15 years ago. And then there's this one, the most common. So you have the continental plates sliding by each other, and one just bumps this way. So it's a sideways hit, and it sets off what's called a sine wave, a circular wave. So that's what caused the building to do this, and that's what caused the freeway to fall down. They had retrofitted it, planning for a more normal type of earthquake, but they got one of these, and the retrofit, ironically, is what brought the building down. It was exactly the wrong thing to do to keep this, what was called the Cypress Avenue freeway up, and so the Cypress thing was built on landfill, which turned liquid during an earthquake, and down the things went. So, all right, so this earthquake is happening. We're in the middle of this verse. Some people rushed outside, some people stood in the doorway, but just about everyone sat there stock still. Jesuits are nothing if not disciplined. And then it stopped. Father Greener resumed the reading. He delivered his sermon, celebrated Mass, and we all filed out about a half an hour later, and found out when we got home or just talked to strangers on the street that this indeed had been a major earthquake, and that fires were burning in San Francisco, and the highway had collapsed, and worst of all, the World Series had been postponed. Well, we do not think much about the wrath of God anymore. We do not give much credence to the idea that God speaks to us through natural disasters. But this sort of thing, a natural disaster in the form of a thunderstorm, induced the young Martin Luther to repent of his sins and give his life to God. He was trapped on a hilltop in a thunderstorm when he was a teenager, was terrified, and he promised to give his life to God. He was spared, and so he did. So without that thunderstorm, Martin Luther might have quietly gone on to the study of law, and who knows how different our world would be. But he did beg for mercy during a thunderstorm when he was a young man. He did promise to give his life to God, He did fulfill that promise by becoming a monk and a priest, and he did have a crisis of faith, and was healed by reading Romans chapter 1, verse 17. The righteous shall live by faith, and the rest is history. So here we are on September 4th, 2016, living the aftershocks of Luther's earthquake, after the Reformation, the English Revolution, the American Revolution, and all sorts of other awful, horrible, wondrous, marvelous, amazing events, both the good and the bad, that have issued from Martin Luther. So the question comes to us, as it came to him, how are we to have faith in the midst of natural disasters, etc., and all the other afflictions that come to us? This question tormented Luther, and it torments all of us at some point, sometimes in the profound form of why anyone has to suffer, and sometimes just in the simplest personal form in the midst of our own suffering. Why? Why me, Lord? Why am I suffering now? Or just why am I not getting what I want? I mean, why do I have to deal with this enormous disappointment? One of the greatest challenges in life is just dealing with disappointment. I mean, let alone disaster and terrible physical suffering, just disappointment. We want something, we didn't get it. Why? Well, and there is no satisfactory answer to these questions. And Luther, tormented by these questions, turned to the scriptures for guidance, and here is what he wrote. I began to understand that the righteousness of God refers to a passive righteousness. Okay, we don't like that word passive. Let's go on for just a second. A passive righteousness means we're not doing anything, by which the merciful God justifies us by faith. As it is written, the righteous person lives by faith. This immediately made me feel as though I had been born again, as though I had entered through open gates into paradise itself. In brief, Luther had been trying too hard. He'd been trying to will himself to be grateful. He tried to will himself into feeling the presence of God. He was trying to make himself have faith, trying to make himself righteous. And this, frankly, unfortunately, is something we can't do. It's beyond our ability. Finally, he had a breakthrough and experienced the peace which passes all understanding, the peace of God, the love of God, the assurance of salvation. It just happened. He didn't do anything. He realized that there was nothing he could do, and he gave up. Reminds me that I've never actually flown a plane, but I'm told that young pilots especially get into death spirals. You've heard the term a death spiral is when the plane's going like this. And it's caused because you're trying to pull up. Okay, so if you're in a death spiral in a plane, I have read, and it's cloudy and you can't see anything, you can tell something is wrong, and your altimeter is telling you that you're going down. So the normal thing you do if you're heading down is you pull up on the wheel, and then you go up. But if you're in a spiral going down, guess what? Pulling up makes it worse. It tightens that spiral. So you know what you do if your plane's going down like that? You let go of the wheel. And the plane, if there's enough air down there, the plane will recover. Whatever flaps are out there, just release, and the plane catches some air, and you pull on up. So that's today's metaphor. Sometimes you've got to let go, and then your plane will catch some air. So we need to remember that the Holy Spirit blows wherever it will. Now, that does not mean that there's nothing we can do. It does not mean that there's nothing we can do to earn the presence of God. We can do a great deal. We can come to church, we can come to Bible study, we can pray, we can do good works, we can be kind. There's all sorts of stuff we can do. But none of it guarantees that wonderful feeling of the presence of God is going to come to us. We can create the conditions, but the final act is bliss, the happiness of God. That is a gift of God. So sometimes we achieve peace through the study of Scripture. Sometimes it takes an earthquake. So here's our concluding story. This is the story of an earthquake. From John Muir, one of our great naturalists, a great writer. Here's the story of an earthquake. Much better than the one I was in. In Yosemite Valley, one morning about 2 o'clock, I was aroused by an earthquake. And although I had never before enjoyed a storm of this sort, the strange, wild, thrilling motion and rumbling could not be mistaken. And I ran out of my cabin near the Sentinel Rock in the Yosemite Valley, both glad and frightened, shouting, "A noble earthquake." John Muir was one of the most delightfully crazy people on the planet. If there was a huge windstorm, he would climb an enormous tree and hang on for dear life while the tree got back and forth like this. I mean, he was a thrill seeker. It was a calm moonlit night, and no sound was heard for the first minute or two, save a low, muffled underground rumbling and a slight rustling of the agitated trees, as if in wrestling with the mountains, nature were holding her breath. Then suddenly out of the strange silence and strange motion there came a tremendous roar. The Eagle Rock, a short distance up the valley, had given way, and I saw it falling in thousands of boulders, pouring to the valley floor in a free curve, luminous from friction, making a terribly sublime and beautiful spectacle. An arc of fire, 1,500 feet span, as true in form and as steady as a rainbow. The sound was inconceivably deep and broad and earnest, as if the whole earth, like a living creature, had at last found a voice and were calling to her sister planets. Eager to see the newborn rock pile, I ran up the valley in the moonlight and climbed it before the huge blocks had come to complete rest. They were slowly settling into their places, chafing, grating against one another, groaning and whispering, but no motion was visible except in a stream of small fragments pattering down the face of the cliff. A cloud of dust particles, the smallest of the boulders, floated out across the whole breadth of the valley and formed a ceiling that lasted until after sunrise, and the air was loaded with the odor of Douglas firs from a grove that had been mowed down and smashed like weeds. Thus, rough places were made smooth. Hear the biblical reference. The rough places were made smooth, and smooth places rough. If for a moment you are inclined to regard these rock piles as mere draggled, chaotic dumps, climb to the top of one of them, tie your mountain shoes firmly over the instep, and with braced nerves run down. He's recommending running down a 1,500-foot rock pile right after the earthquake, not worrying about aftershocks, which he did. You will then find your feet playing a tune and quickly discover the music and poetry of rock piles. A fine lesson, and all nature's wildness tells the same story. Storms of every sort, torrents, earthquakes, cataclysms, convulsions of nature, however mysterious and lawless at first they seem, are only harmonious notes in the song of creation, varied expressions of God's love. Amen.
joy this morning, and that is the dresses that you see hanging up here. For the past few years, Women's Fellowship has made dresses, and we send them to the Little Dresses for Africa project. And although Africa is in the title of the project, these dresses go all over the world to impoverished countries. They even go to the United States, they go to Appalachian Mountains, and they go to South Dakota. So we want to thank everyone who helped make them, who provided pillowcases, from which some of them are made, for providing fabrics and the notions, and for providing money for postage, which we can always use more, money for postage. But before we pack them up and send them off, we're going to have Richard bless them.
Okay, please join me in prayer. Bless, O Lord, these wonderful gifts. Bless the gift of givers. Bless their service. Fill them with gratitude for their ability to be of service. And may these dresses go out to delight the eye and cover the body and enable people to go to school and to go to work and to have fulfilling and useful lives. Please add a blessing to our prayer, Almighty God. Amen. So now's the time to respond to God's love through the gifts of your offering. Remember, it is more blessed to give than to receive.
Great is the Lord.
these gifts to your work in this church, in this community, and around the world. Through Christ our Lord. Amen.